There's a burning question for me that I've always wanted to ask the Commission. That we have seen events like this. Sorry, just a second. We have seen events such as this. We've seen the boycott. We have seen quite a few others, toilets on the veld, forced removals, and so on. My question is in terms of the Commission, and this is based on complaints I've picked up on other people, including from this community. And I have to be honest with you, I concur to some extent. Why is the Commission not much more proactive than it is now? So that, for example, it can prevent people's belongings, homes, poverty, vulnerable communities from being victimized, and then the Commission acts after the fact, when now you cannot take the people back to their demolished properties and so on. Do you understand my question?
Completely.
Okay.
No, I completely concur with that criticism. When I came into the Commission in 2009, that was one of the things that concerned me greatly. How do we ensure that we get to the root causes of the problems? How do we understand what the systemic structural problems are, so that we not just dealing with individual violations after they've occurred, but to look at how do you begin to change the way we understand and deal with and address human rights violations. So the way in which we have worked on water and sanitation has been an attempt to change that. And if I had to just explain the rationale behind that, we got an individual complaint from a specific municipality in the Western Cape around unenclosed toilets that the city had built. And the Commission investigated those toilets and ruled that the municipality must enclose those toilets in a way that upheld dignity, clean environment, and privacy. And we did the same thing in the Free State, where there were unenclosed toilets as well. So one was an ANC and one was a DA municipality. We made the same ruling against both of them, because for us it's not a political issue in terms of political parties. It's a broader question around how government, whether it's from local to national to provincial, understands human rights as a priority. Because there's a global context in which human rights is undermined. So water, for example, is often not seen as a human right. It's seen in terms of the General Agreement in Trade in Services, in terms of what the Nestle CEO has said on YouTube and in other forums, and the way in which water is treated. It's treated as a commodity. So, and it's the same with other human rights in our constitution, whether it's the rights to land or the right to health or to housing, to education, etc. That mindset has to be changed, of whether it's a right or whether it's a commodity. And whether it's the first and foremost thing is to ensure the profits of big companies, or the first and foremost thing is to ensure that people who don't have rights, who are the poorest people in our country, actually have those rights. And to address the fact that 20 years into our democracy, the apartheid spatial geography is what characterizes those who have rights and those who don't have rights. And so the way in which we dealt with those two complaints was not to just deal with it as those individual municipalities, but to say to national government, the Presidency's Department for Performance Monitoring and Evaluation must give us a report on what is happening in every single municipality across the entire country in relation to water and sanitation. And it had to give us a report on what the plan was, the proactive plan that you're talking about. What is the proactive plan to address the rights to water and sanitation? bearing in mind that you cannot address any single right without looking at every other right. Because water has a knock-on effect on health, on education, on safety and security of those women who spend hours collecting sources of free water. And so there's a whole, the indivisibility of rights is absolutely fundamental. And you can't talk about human beings in a fragmented fashion. And so it's been trying to change that way in which we as a commission work, because absolutely you're correct that we have to ensure, because our job is to ensure that government and business is accountable when they violate human rights. But we shouldn't be getting them to tell us about the violations after they've occurred. We should be asking them, and which we have done. We've said, okay, tell us your plan to fix up the problems all over the country. So we asked for that plan, and we haven't seen a proper proactive strategy. But part of the problem also comes back to this question of, is water a right, or is water or any other human right a commodity? And so if it's a right, why is it, if government is true to the Constitution and sees it as a right, why is it that those who use most of South Africa's water, the companies across our country, whether it's mining or agribusiness or tourist industries, etc., why is it that they use most of South Africa's water and they pay less per kilolitre of water than households do? Why is it that the way in which they pollute the water is not properly, they don't pay for the cleaning up of that pollution, so acid mine drainage and other things, they don't pay for it. They waste most of South Africa's water. Yet government's symbol of wastage is a dripping tap in a poor community. So it's to try to change those to shift the way in which government thinks about it and to hold them accountable. So when we held the hearings in every province across the country, in the poorest communities that were identified by the DPME's own report and by our own officers, what we found was that people who don't have water and sanitation, don't have health, don't have education, etc., etc. And so we also got the DPME to come to those hearings, as well as local government and provincial government. And we said, come, don't just give a speech and run away. Come and listen to what people are saying. And then when you've heard what people say, tell people how you're going to address the problems that they face. But it's a question, I think, fundamentally one of power. And I think that's the heart of how we as a commission then can begin to play a role in bringing those voices to the fore and saying, not just leaving. So when we dealt with the complaint in the Western Cape, as soon as we accepted the complaint, there was massive publicity about it, and the community could speak for themselves. So that's part of also. And when we held the hearings, the communities could come forward and say, members of the community could come forward and say, this is what is happening. And like with today, if it's the impact on women, the gendered impact on women and girls is huge. You know, we keep talking about gender-based violence, but you can't deal with it just as a criminal justice matter. You can't just put away young men and boys without saying, well, what's the conditions that do two things. One is make women vulnerable to misogynistic violence, but two, what is it that is brutalizing young boys to grow up to do such misogynistic things? And this is a dehumanization, and that process of dehumanization goes back centuries. So how do we bring all the different, as a commission we've got a specific mandate, and so when we're dealing with the specific problems, we're trying to deal with them now, not just in terms of saying, yes, the municipality must ensure, for example, if there's no water, that there must be a 48-hour turnaround where people must have access to clean water. But it must be linked to a long-term solution. But we're trying to change the way we as an institution work to be able to ensure that government gives a proactive plan. So we wouldn't have had we submit our reports to Parliament. We submitted the water and sanitation report to Parliament. The question is that Parliament then has oversight power over government ministers and departments to hold them accountable and to say, what are you doing to address the recommendations that the Commission has come up with through a process of speaking to people in different communities across the country. So that's the way in which we're trying to change it, and I think we have raised a lot of the problems that government has begun to respond to differently. So one of the big problems was the lack of cooperation and collaboration between government. To do the report of the DPME to the Commission, several departments had to come together to compile the report. Yes.
There's more I want to ask. Really.
Sure.
Shouldn't the Commission also be proactive in terms of calling the foreign, the British citizens and so on,
The companies.
Shouldn't the Commission also be taking to task on behalf of
communities,
the vulnerable communities, something that would have prevented the massacre, and be proactive in actually also holding accountable the British
companies,
citizens who are shareholders in this company that violates the human dignity and rights of the ordinary vulnerable people, such as this community?
Absolutely. I think the thing is here to hold the companies which are actually working in our country accountable is something that the Commission has begun to do through its work on business and human rights. So we have, for example, in terms of the Farlam Commission, the thing that I was raising about looking at their social and labour plans and saying, let's analyse it, but let's analyse not just Lonman's social and labour plans. Let's look at the system and why the system has failed. And what is the problem there? And let's actually get down to, you're absolutely correct. How do we begin? As a Commission, we are supposed to operate within the confines of our country. But actually, the human rights violations are linked essentially to companies which are operating outside of our borders and would take the wealth of our country outside of our borders. So, the mining companies' tax, for example, has significantly decreased over the last few decades compared to income tax, which has increased. So middle class and working class communities are paying much more than they used to pay, whereas mining companies are paying much less than they used to pay. And there's a number of factors, I think, that have to be challenged. The Commission, though, has a limited mandate, and it's important to understand that the way in which we also work is to also see how do we work getting advice, firstly, from a whole range of stakeholders, going to people who are in communities to get them to talk and to tell us what are their problems. And so the Commission has shifted its focus as well. And then it's to really say, how do we make sure that those who have power, whether they're in business or government, are accountable, not just to the Commission, but to the people of this country.